I'm Mark Hennick. This is So-Called Normal. Hey folks, welcome to So-Called Normal. I'm Mark Hennick. We've got a really important episode for you today, a really important guest. Her name is Lynn Keane. Lynn has been active in the suicide prevention world in some way or another for many years. It's been more than 10 years now since her son Daniel died by suicide. And we share his story. We talk about the legacy that he left and the impact that he had, both his life and his death, on his mother. And now how she's been able to share her story through a TEDx Youth Toronto talk, through her writing, certainly, her advocacy work and her speaking. She's just such a powerful force, and we had such a deep, I think, beautiful conversation and connection. She's such an easy person to connect with. So I hope that comes through on the episode today, and I know that there's going to be other parents listening who have also lost loved ones to suicide, and I think in particular that it'll be an important episode for you to know that you're not alone, that there's others who have certainly been through this too, and you can find strength in the community of people who have been through similar adversities. I mean, that's the whole point of this show, right? There's really no such thing as perfect normal. That we're all just figuring this out as we go, and I think Lynn, my conversation with Lynn is a particularly good example of that. So, hang with this episode. It's really emotional at points, but I think it's important. So here's my conversation on So-Called Normal with my friend Lynn Keane.
So thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. I'm a mom. I'm now an author, a triathlete, and I'm also a survivor of suicide loss, which is probably one of the reasons that we met.
Yeah. That's a diverse range of
because I look at myself as many things, and for many years after losing our son Daniel to suicide, I saw myself only as a survivor.
Right.
It will be 10 years, April of 2019, and I thankfully see myself again as a mom. As many people, not just a survivor of suicide loss, but it's taken me 10 years to get there.
Do you have other kids? Or?
I do. I have my eldest daughter, Amy, is 30, and my youngest is 24.
Okay, so Daniel was the middle.
No, Daniel was actually the oldest.
Oh, he was the oldest.
Everybody changed.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
So you're the middle child became the oldest, and the youngest child became my second child. So it's it changes so many dynamics that are. It's just this ball of stuff that changes when you lose somebody suddenly, and suicide just complicates it.
Yeah, 10 years. That's a big milestone.
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling? I mean,
I think the middle years was when I started to gather myself and figure out, dive back into Daniel's life and to really understand what the issues were and sort of his whole timeline and try to understand that. And then I think once I got through that, I was more accepting of his suicide because I understood to a degree that I could.
Right.
What were the contributing factors? What were the things as he was a young kid that changed him, and as a young adult going to university? And then I started to, as I said, I was an advocate sort of from day one, not purposely, but I think that's just where I found myself. Started to find myself again. So, getting up to 8 and 9 years, I did something that I never thought I would ever do in my life, but it stemmed from a conversation with Daniel. And back in 2008, I said, I want to do triathlon. And we joked about it, and he said, yeah, I think you could do it. And so this past summer, I did an Ironman. And I did it in honor of all my family, but it was that first conversation we had in 2008 that I remember.
Yeah, and you made it all the way through?
I finished it.
You finished it? Wow.
15 plus hours, but I got her done.
Wow. So how long do you have to train to do an Ironman?
A year.
Yeah.
A first timer, I think you really have to give yourself a year to.
Sure.
So my coach actually said to me after it was all done, it was much more than an Ironman for you. It had so many other tentacles to why I would even want to start down that road. But for me, I think that is a really healing journey. I've always been a runner. The few days after his passing, I had to get out of the house, and I just started running.
Yeah.
I literally put my running shoes on, waved my husband off because he wanted to drive to make sure I would be okay. And I just said, I need to go. And basically I just started running.
Was part of you ever feeling like you were trying to run away from
absolutely.
what you were feeling? Yeah.
I mean, that's really tied into the day that we found out that he had taken his life. The day before, Daniel was doing some work with his dad on taxes, and he had this summer business which was quite successful, but he wasn't really great at keeping track of receipts and his accounting. Mm-hmm. He was fabulous with his hands. He loved working outdoors. That was his thing. So he decided to go up north to pick up receipts and meet with his bank manager. And, unbeknownst to us, there was a whole raft of several years that had been building up and to this day. And
like what?
So, we go back to when he was a little kid. He had asthma and anaphylaxis, which, today we treat those as just, they're conditions, right? We just treat them. But what we didn't realize as young parents is that particularly asthma is definitely a precursor to potentially onset of adult depression. Right. It's just part of the inflammation that goes through our bodies, to our brains. That was sort of the very first part. And then we move on to, Daniel did a lot of the extreme sports as a young guy, teenager, probably hit his head several times. Sure. Wakeboarding, snowboarding, skateboarding. Again, we weren't really cognizant of the fact that even though he may not have had a diagnosable concussion, right, he certainly hit his head hard and could have caused some issues there. He goes away to university, and he never really drank or really was. He was into sports primarily. That was his life. And first year, he just started falling behind, like really falling behind. And to coming from being a really good student, well liked by everybody, a good athlete, and then all of a sudden the wall came down. So you think of it, he's away from home. He's now having to manage all his food because he had anaphylaxis to a variety of items. So he had to manage where he got the food. He couldn't just be like the rest of the guys. He couldn't just go get pizza.
And were you doing that for him before?
A lot of it. I mean, we were doing it as a family. We ate what he ate, but and we never really tried to draw attention to it, and he certainly didn't. But I think there was just a lot of anxiety around that. But I think there was this sort of physiological changes that were happening to him as he grew up, irrespective of what I even know or could think of at the time. So he started missing class, and then he started self-medicating. And I say self-medicating. He was really going out. He was drinking, something he hadn't done. But I look at it, it was sort of a way to manage his life there. And yet when he would come home, everything was great.
And was he living far away for?
He was in Ottawa.
Okay.
For his the first university he attended was in Ottawa.
So it's not like he could just hop in his car and easily come back.
Right.
That's a good distance away.
We would see him during holidays. He'd come home, reading week, those kinds of things, and we always made a point to spend that time together. We kind of always were this unit of five that, as long as the kids wanted to be with us, we wanted to be with them. Right. And so we did, traveled together, hung out a lot. And his first thing is he'd text me or he'd call me and say, "Mom, I'm coming home. Let's go shopping?" Because he loved to cook. Believe it or not, he became a good cook in spite of food allergies, I think. So, we'd hop in the car, go get the food, and he would cook, and we'd just sort of be gathered together. And it sounds very simplistic, but that was really because food started to represent something that we could do together and celebrate, not be afraid of.
Sure.
Because going out to restaurants was not as easy when you've got somebody who's allergic to so many items. So what we were seeing was primarily a normal student. I did notice, though, sort of that summer after first year, him distancing himself from us, and actually there was an agitation that I had really never seen in him because he was such a great. He was just easy. He was like a very easy kid to raise, and.
But what do you mean agitation?
Like he would be pissed off at you for really easy, like, and he would go out and he would stay out late and he would consume a lot of alcohol, and when he'd get up to start his business, he would just be not in the best space, and I didn't know frankly how to manage that because I'd not dealt with it.
Right.
So one night I did confront him after a really bad late night of carrying on, and we had a brutal fight, and I just remember thinking, something's changed. And so the next day, when the dust had settled, Daniel, his dad, and I, we just sat and we were up at the cottage and we just had a long conversation about, why are you, what is driving this need to drink to sort of not function? And he said he agreed. He says, I think it's gotten out of hand, and I get it. And I want to stop it. And so that's kind of where we ended that summer, was just kind of back on track. And
how old was he at this point?
So I want to say 20, maybe 20.
Yeah.
The pivotal years I recall the most are really from 2007 to 2009. Because we had this sort of up and downs, he would be managing and then he wouldn't. And he was never diagnosed with a condition, a mental health condition. But if you read the research and if you looked at him, you'd say possibly bipolar, because it's just when he was home, he was filled with mania to get stuff done. I mean, we were on the go, we were doing stuff. But again, we were looking at it as he was excited, happy to be home with us. And we weren't seeing the downside of that, which was being back at school, being isolated, not going to class.
Right.
And a lot of things were sliding, even with his business now. So
what was the business? What did he do?
So it was Cottage Concierge. It was a summer maintenance business.
Okay.
He started it from the ground up and had 2 great years. It had employees. But, regardless of what was going on, everything that was part of his life was, in his mind, had become just blown up. Yeah. And because of where he was at emotionally, he felt that everything was as a result of him.
Right.
And the bigger picture was he wasn't functioning because his brain wasn't helping him function. He had sort of, when you're in that space, again, this is hindsight. This is something that I really wish I had a handle on, and probably one of the reasons I was so strongly compelled to speak out, because I just could not believe that you'd be living or knowing somebody and that they were in such pain.
Right.
And that's, I think, the hardest part for me to continue to wrap my head around is, watching things now from the rearview mirror, I can see the sadness.
Sure.
And there were so many red flags, but I didn't connect anything. None of us in our family really, we started to understand things weren't right, and we went to our doctor. But even at the time, if you think about 12 years ago even, the doctor basically was completely uneducated on how to help us and help us advocate.
So you did talk to a doctor?
I did. I talked to my doctor about his drinking, and I said, "This is not normal. What do we do?" And to this day, I still see that doctor, and we have a relationship. But the words that he said to me were, "Daniel will have to hit rock bottom," and those words echo. Nobody should hit rock bottom to begin to get help, least of all a young person.
And do you think it was at all kind of dismissed because he's a college student, first year college student, and that's expected kind of thing?
And I think that we need to go back to that agitation, or this sort of it wasn't arrogance. It was just this sense of even sometimes anger. Yep. But I almost thought, is this the process of a young man growing up and away from me? Is this like maybe this is part of this? We'd been sort of so hyper close, a lot of it because of his allergies and stuff like that. But
a phase, you think,
is this a process? Normal? And I remember thinking that after the fact, something as simple as, oftentimes I would drive him back to school. So he had then transferred after that first year in Ottawa. He recognized the issues. He wanted to get sort of get in closer proximity to his family, so he was able to get into Laurier. And that seemed to be this beginning of hope again, because he got into a program he wanted to get into. And at the end of it, he went to Ottawa, a lot of it probably because he thought that's what we wanted him to do.
Right.
I would have, in the end of the day, he wanted to work outside. That would have been his, regardless of an illness, he was happiest outdoors, happiest doing those kinds of things, doing something that he felt that was reward for him.
Right.
He liked communications, so he got into Laurier for communications, and things seemed to be progressing positively, and we got to see him more, which actually was helpful because we sort of were a lot more aware.
Sure.
But again, I think he was actually it was sort of progressing into another area or another depth of despair. Again, after suicide, we would meet with friends at different times, and they'd say we had no idea that the fact that Daniel would say we're coming out and then he never would show up, or he'd say he'd bail on us late, and he was doing those things with us as well. But you can't connect every dot to suicide,
especially not when you're in it. I mean, I haven't met a parent yet who has lost a kid to suicide where I didn't think, what parent would ever want to think of that as a possibility when their kid is sitting right in front of them, that one day maybe they're not?
Yeah. And I don't think I do now. I do now. Unfortunately, I had to face that. But I think we generally are hopeful people, just generally. Sure. I think that's how we get up every day and live our lives. So I don't think, as you said, I don't think you look for the worst in your kids. You don't want to go down those roads. I think one of the reasons I do speak up is because I want to thread those series of I guess we'll call them events that happened from the time he was very little and the way he viewed the world because of particularly his anaphylaxis. Mm-hmm. But also when he was little with the asthma, he was in the hospital quite a bit. So those are all very early life experiences that can have an impact as kids grow. Yeah. I always said to DK, I called him DK, was his name. His pet name, I guess. And I'd say, I think, how would I say this? But I said, kids have a lot worse and deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I why do we say this as parents? It's just like, it's a silly thing to say, but I think we're trying to say is we get it, but at the end of the day, the world is yours. Right. We'll manage this. But we're not in that person's body. We don't know. And particularly if it's psychological, that's like the absolute worst thing because you're not dealing with the person that you think you're dealing with. You're not dealing with the person who's functioning at a level that you thought you were. And so I really, I remember when I was writing Give Sorrow Words, I remember thinking, what will anybody remember when I speak or when it's like education and compassion. Because to me, that's what we weren't able to give him was compassion because we loved him so desperately, but we were like, you can do anything. Right. Get it together. How is that helpful if you're not functioning?
Right. So he moves over to Laurier, and you have this connection with him. When did things really start to get bad, or did you see when it really got bad and eventually led to his death?
2008 was probably one of our best years as a family. In the sense, I'll say we believed Daniel was well. Like when I say well, we never had those. A mental illness or even talking about mental health, really, we still weren't talking about that. Right. We certainly weren't talking about suicide. No. But we'd have these conversations. I'd drive him home or drive him back to Laurier. I'd pick him up. And I remember one of our last drives, we thought he was at Laurier. He actually had dropped out, but we didn't know it. Okay. And he faked that he was still there. And so that was it. So again, all these things happened in isolation and so that's that said. But one day when I was driving him back, he'd said to me, he talked to me about friends and just how messed up they were. And I remember because the background, the music was Black from Pearl Jam. And I just went like, this song is so sad, Daniel. This is just like, I'm crying in the car listening to it. But there was, I think he was trying to talk to me. I think he was trying to tell me I'm not living. I'm not feeling like I'm living here and I don't know what's wrong. And I think he got to such a state that he was so afraid to even speak the words because he was having nightmares, he was losing weight. All of sort of the classic hallmarks we talk about now, they were there. Again, we're completely uneducated to what's going on. But I'd go into his room at night and we'd sit down and talk and he, we'd have these conversations and say, could you turn that TV off? And he goes, I can't fall asleep without it. So he'd have that light on all night. So he didn't sleep. He wasn't getting the sleep. So his body's not being helped. So he went from being this great, young athlete to being unhealthy. And so what I would say is there were so many points along that journey that we could have intervened. Right. And that's what sucks.
And how many times have you gone over that in your head in the last 10 years?
Regularly. Like, probably the first 3-4 years, probably daily. Immediately, because the whole 24 hours, once we didn't really realize what was happening, but I can go into that after. But it wasn't until I had accepted that something had happened to Daniel, because basically he went to the cottage, as I mentioned. He was coming home for dinner. We had planned dinner. We talked about 4 or 5 times that day. And then around 6, 7 o'clock, we started texting him saying, when are you coming back? And we were just starting to get very short, very sort of 2-word answers to our texts. And it was just chilling. And I said to my husband at that time, I said, something's not right. And then it was, so, we kept trying to communicate. And at 9 o'clock, we got the last transmission was heading west.
Where was he going?
So heading west would have been coming, or heading home, heading west.
Right.
And this had, so by this time we're like, look, we'd made dinner plans. We were all going to be together. And then he decided to go to see somebody, but he never really left the cottage. So what had ever had, again, this is years, but what had ever started to transpire on that afternoon, it was a late April day, the skies got dark, and I think he had moved from ideation to, and I look at, again, from reading and from doing research and talking to specialists, it's a very short window. Yeah.
To your knowledge, did he have prior attempts, or?
I did not.
Yeah.
I do believe that he tried to stay here as long as he could.
Sure.
But I would have no knowledge of that.
Yeah. You mentioned that you talked a number of times that day. What did you talk about? Do you remember the last time that you spoke to him?
Oh, like it was yesterday. I mean, I had started swimming with these triathlon groups, and I was saying, I got in the water and I was doing this, and this. He was always such a big cheerleader of everybody. And so he was just, the conversations up until 4:00 were like just what's for dinner. Mm-hmm. And actually he said, I've had time to, when I drove up to the cottage, it's about a 2-hour drive. He said, I've had time to really reflect on, and those are his words, reflect on, these past years. And I really want to make this a great summer. Mm. And I think in my mind, he was trying so hard to get to that summer. And, by the time he just could not get there. And so we basically waited up all night just trying to reach him, and we asked a neighbor, is there any lights on, because he can sort of see over, and he said, I'll go first thing in the morning. And we got the police involved, and we sent a picture, and life changed. And I knew around when I tried to sleep that night, I knew this was not good, because this was just so not, no matter what had happened in our life with our kids, nothing had ever come close to not being able to connect with them, losing touch. And I think I probably always feared Daniel just because of his allergies. I think I always, you've got to keep an EpiPen around, and you've got to sort of have that sort of extra sense about a kid that's lives with certain conditions. Right. So I probably always had this little more heightened awareness. And it was just at the time I started to let that go. I was like, he's on his own. He's cooking his food. He's doing what he needs to do. He's like on a mission. He's got clients for this business. He's doing well. And it was just like, it's like I let, my foot off the gas. And I know that's just sort of a way to deal with things internally. But I remember thinking that year I started to have this sense of calm, that he was able to look after himself. And he had for years. It was just my own anxiety, I think, was less.
So when did you find out?
So the next morning, my husband dropped my daughter off, my youngest to school. We were a mess. We weren't even speaking, because we knew it was like this. If we spoke to one another, it was like double the pain.
Right.
And there was no way to communicate to each other. So we basically went to sleep in silence, woke up in silence. I literally got up and took my dog to the park, and it was by Lake Ontario. And I just kept walking. And you talked earlier when we started talking about running away. Right. That's when I began running.
Really?
I began physically running from what was coming. And I knew it wasn't going to be good. But even up until at that moment, I still had no sense that this could be any part of our life. I thought he was in a car accident. I thought everything else but lost by suicide. Right. So my husband did get a call from our neighbor, because when our neighbor walked over there, he found Daniel.
Right.
And that neighbor, I mean, we were always connected. We're connected for life. And he was always so close with Daniel. And he called my husband and just said, the news isn't good. And so my husband's trying to frantically get a hold of me, and I won't answer the phone. And I finally picked it up, and he said, the news isn't good to me, and I just lost it. And I think it was like I said, I don't want to know anymore. I get that Daniel's gone. I don't want to know anymore. And it wasn't until later that afternoon when we'd all kind of gotten back to the house. We'd picked Amy up because she was at another university, and Emily was home, and I just went outside to be in the backyard because I just knew I felt some connection to nature that I'd never felt before. And Amy walked outside and put her arm on my shoulder, and she said, "You're going to make something come of this." And at that moment, I knew it was suicide. And also at that moment, I had absolutely no sense of shame. I just thought, my God, you were in such pain.
Right.
And your family couldn't help you. But I never had a sense of anything more than that at the moment.
Had you had any prior exposure at this point to mental health, talking about mental health, suicide, anything like that? Like, what did you believe about suicide at that time?
So this kind of converged with, so it was 2009, so 2008 was the financial crisis. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of stuff going on in the world just generally, and it was like a really negative time. I remember that we as a family would talk about the things that were happening in the world and the financial crisis, and there was a person in our community who took his life. And I remember having a conversation on the sofa with Daniel, and I was sitting in the chair and he's on the sofa, and I just said, I don't even understand. Up until that point, I don't even think I had written the word suicide,
right,
or had the conversation about it. And I said, and he had family and he had kids, and I said, I have no understanding that what would bring a person to that point. And Daniel looked at me and said, how could he? How could he leave his kids? And that was kind of our conversation.
Right.
So it really shows me that the point when a person is at that sort of complete loss of hope he wasn't saying that for my benefit. He was saying that because that's what he believed at the time.
And when you get into that place, I mean, having been there myself, I can't speak for everybody, but you get so neurologically, emotionally, and otherwise so blinded, so focused in on that one thing that it's the only thing you can see. You can't even see what you used to believe or what you might believe. There's only that feeling in that moment.
Then our world literally, it was like a bomb was dropped. And I remember, then going to a couple of days later, I went for a run, and I just wailed at the world. And for 2 years, I became socially isolated myself. I really, because the people I knew in my prior life knew our family. Right. And now that we weren't intact, that's the way I kind of looked at it at that point, was we weren't whole. I didn't want to see them because I didn't want to remember what it was like to be that way. Right. It was such a bizarre, and I really felt I got as close to a grief-driven depression as one could be. And I had my own thoughts. I started to think, well, if Daniel's not here, I can't. Like, how can I live in a world without my son? And that's so there's a whole other side of that, is that you're not rational at all, and sadly, the outside world doesn't really know how to help you. They do what they can, and I did have some wonderful and great people that stood there as I just melted. But honestly, you got to find a way to start facing it and walk to the pain. And I think after staying in bed for the better part of 2 years and being completely isolated, people, I would hear things, sort of. And again, I know people did things for my benefit, but they were so misplaced. Like, you got to get strong for your kids. Well, right. You got to get strong for yourself, and if you can't, you're no good to yourself or anyone else. So I really, my kids and my husband, I think we all kind of went in our own way, and that's the other thing, is when you're in such deep grief, you can't help each other, right. Even though you're still in that same building together, that house. There's just no allowance for being empathetic to someone else's pain, because you've lost whatever skills that you had once, and everything you believed is gone.
Yeah. And were you working at that point as well?
So I sort of, in my former life, was a sports journalist at CBC. No, I sort of left that world and kind of was doing my own thing, and I really got into doing marathoning kind of as my job, but
Right.
I was doing other things. And I also had a long time event that I do for Campuchia Gaius. So we do a road race up in Muskoka, and I had become the race director.
Wow.
And we just hit 15 years this year, but Daniel and all the rest of our family, basically did all the work for that race for years. So, that year I couldn't even do that race. I had to punt it over to my partner up there to manage it. But, it's basically raising the rest of the kids, getting my youngest off to university. She was only 15 at the time of the loss. So,
how did you because you're still a mother, right?
Yeah.
So that question then that was misplaced of still being there for your other kids. How did they get through it? How did you get through it together as a family?
So bizarre as it sounded, I think the one thing that we did kind of early on, so this happened in April, so May 24th was the first sort of holiday, I guess, or event that we would come together. And we decided to go up to Blue Mountain just to get out of the house. It was the worst thing we ever did. It's, again, when you're running, we weren't necessarily physically running away at that point, but we knew we couldn't be in places where we had been before. We couldn't go back to the cottage at all. We couldn't be in the house. And we all got there and we sat there and we thought, we can't do this. So we stayed one night and turned around and came home, and we said, okay, what can we do? What is it we can do that can just lift us up for an hour? So we started watching 30 Rock on television. And honestly, the act of laughing when you're a mess is like the best. The comedy is a healing outlet. And so we then we became you become like what's the word? Like you compulsive. You need it because you knew that fixed you for an hour.
Right.
I need more of it, right? So you become sort of fixated on what can you get next to give you a bit of happiness. So that was sort of the opening to sort of softening in your grief.
Right.
But Mark, it's each one of us has found a way in not the same ways, and it certainly has never happened at the same time. We're all still managing our own grief, and then trying to understand where everybody is now 10 years after. Right. And so it's an ongoing, and I just recently decided that I need to know where I'm at in 10 years. So I started talking again to somebody, because I think it's like, I've really been managing almost, like, why am I managing this well? And I've started to question my good health, my good mental health, and not question it in a way that I think it's wrong. I think what I want to question is, I did the grief work for many, many years, and I think it led me to a point, but then I started to carry on with that other life, and I want to understand where at 10 years, have I put it somewhere? Do I need, these are very sort of esoteric questions, but I need to understand where I'm at, in 10 years.
Was there a point in your recovery where you felt like you had let it go, that you had moved on? Have you reached that point?
I never said move. I can't ever say moved on. I think there's like a physical moving away from Daniel, but I think in the ways that we say that, I think yes. And I
because I find that in grief there's always that. I can only speak to my own experience, but there's a hesitance to let go of that old life and start something new, start a new life, because it means you're starting a new life without that person in it anymore, and you're not ready for that sometimes, right?
I think I probably. So we stayed in our home, our home that Daniel lived in, for about 5 years, no longer than that. We stayed in our house for several years after. And purposely, well, first of all, we weren't in any position to start to pack up his room or anything. Mm-hmm. And so very, very slowly, I started to go into his room and just start to shift things around, because for many years I kept everything intact. Really? Yeah. That was a necessary thing, because it was a place I could still go that had his memories very vividly.
The smells. I mean, to this day, in his hat collection, it's him. I still have his, and I have his T-shirts and my, I don't look at any of it. It's like whatever it is you need. And I always say this to people: if you need something, and you may have thought in your other life this is odd, go for it. Right. It's something you need. If you need it that badly, then there's a reason that you've hung on to something. Right. And yes, over the years we've let go of. We've moved houses, and so now the house we're in now does not have
a room for Daniel. We'll say a bedroom has less rooms.
Was there a moment, though, that...
It's hard.
that you realized that maybe you weren't expecting that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and it was like, hit me like very hard, because I think when you're at the moment of saying, okay, I'm ready for this change, and then it's almost like you're after you've made the decision, you think, he's not going to have a room here. But, I don't even look at his gravesite as where he resides. I mean, to me, he resides in our life, in our memories, and very viscerally in moments in my life that I go, okay, all right, I get it. And I often thought, when I really got into doing a lot of the mental health advocacy and suicide prevention, I got so deep into it, and I would say to him, like, you're going to give me a sign, right? When I can maybe back off and maybe give it to somebody else, because there are times, and you know yourself, like you have to protect yourself,
sure.
And so you've got to giving of your own real truths is like, it's life affirming, but it's also can be very difficult, and there's a price you pay. And I'm better at it now, but early on, I'd come home from things or talks or whatever, I was just like in bed, because you're so raw about. And then it sort of kind of triggers things again. So I'm much better at handling that now.
Yeah. Tell me about the stages of grief. Did that, in terms of denial and anger and some I've experienced all of them, but they don't feel that way when you experience it.
No.
Does that hold true when you lose somebody to suicide as well? In terms of, they say that you don't move through them necessarily in a linear kind of way, that they happen all over the place. But was that your experience as well?
So to go back to this running away theme, I think that's what I was most afraid of, was I didn't know what was coming next, because I'd never lost anybody that close to me.
Right.
So I didn't understand. I didn't have any sense of what to expect. But for me, it would be all things at once, or one thing. It was just very fluid. I would cry, and then I would remember having respite for maybe 5 minutes. The physical act of crying sort of changed up. It just gave you like a window of peace. Also, again, through grief, I found really helpful was reading others' stories, not necessarily of suicide, but of loss, of like catastrophic loss, just to understand that they were able to survive.
Right.
So I read a lot. Like in the first year, I can't even count how many books I read. I just was ravenous again of trying to understand how people coped and managed. But in terms of my personal way through was once I started walking towards it, and it hit me hard. That was the way I could manage it, because denial, I think, comes up real fast. I think the denial was like the night of one, and then I believe shock is a protective covering that stays for a few days, and it's like, thankfully you have that, because I think it allows you to manage, to make arrangements, to do the things that you have to do when someone dies very suddenly. When it goes, all I can tell you is when we closed the door after the service, and we had a few people together for a little, it wasn't a celebration, it was just a gathering. We came home, shut the door, and the pain in the house was something I can't, to this day, when I know someone has lost somebody, and it's not necessarily a sudden death or a tragic, I just know when that part is done, the next part is the hardest work you'll ever do in your life.
Yeah, the day after the funeral, basically, whenever all the casseroles go away, everybody's gone.
And it's such a loneliness that you just. There's no. I mean, all I can say is you. I mean, for me, because I think I still didn't have the ability to, to say the way I could say now. I would read something and I'll feel better. Back then, I didn't know what I was doing. So I relied on a grief counselor and sleep, and to the degree I could on my family. And I think we were all the same. And I literally stayed in bed so I could sleep. I just felt sleeping. I didn't have to live with the present. Not a great way to function for very long, because you're not going to get well.
So when did that start to turn around, where you started to get yourself out of bed more and
So I did have a dog, so I had to walk the dog. So I would get up, try to get myself together, put on my sunglasses, and just go for a walk. And again, I did not want to run into anybody. I never felt the shame of what my son, of his passing, the suicide. What struck me was his pain, but I didn't want to have to explain to anybody what I had no words for anybody. And I don't know, do you know if people are watching? I don't know, but you feel this, like you feel like you have a spotlight on you when you're walking around, and I think it's your mind is playing tricks. But
I remember I don't know why this memory stands out, but I lost my mother very suddenly a couple of years ago. And it's burned into my memory the first time I rode the subway after losing my mother. Went back to Cape Breton, did all of the stuff, came back to Toronto about three weeks later, I'd say. And I had that exact same feeling, just sitting on the subway thinking, oh, this is time to go back to real life and all these people going about their business.
Right.
And I just started crying on the subway.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know what to do with myself. So I can relate to that experience. It's just so
you're so separate
strange.
from the
so
norm.
separate. Like you're in a little bubble and everybody else is just going on with their life.
How are you just moving about the day?
Yeah.
And I'm stuck here. And again, I think it's the process of grieving, and we as mourners, and I think the Hebrew Kaddish speaks to it. It's just you have to allow. There is grace in mourning, and when you start to feel that grace, you recognize the deeper I get in this, the better I'm going to be. The more deeply I mourn you, my son, the healthier I will end up on the other side. Again, I don't think at the time I had that reference.
No, but you
but
do
I could
enter
feel,
into it, sure.
I knew, and I think that sort of was probably, you asked me about the time, it's probably, I did get out of bed, I did function, I had to make dinner or had to make breakfast for my daughters, but I would retreat a lot. And then I think probably at the 2-year mark, I started to retreat less. And it was probably around the 1.5-year mark, I started writing. And the writing was really that elixir that just, because I could write to Daniel, not writing for anybody but myself, and I would actually literally hear his voice. And I could see him walk with this, he had this maybe he thought he was cool, but he never acted like it, but he just had this sort of very natural affinity to look cool all the time. And he always wore flip-flops, even in the winter. So I would see those things in my mind's eye, and I would make me laugh. And so I just kept writing about him. And then I also wanted to write because I was starting to get paranoid that I would lose my memory of those things. You don't. But again, not knowing anything, I started to write about him, and sort of in the physical sense. And then I turned some corner, and I thought, no, I need to now find out why as best I can. And that's when I went to Dr. Roger McIntyre in Toronto. I basically, through a friend, got in. He said, I'll give you an hour. What do you need? And I said, this is what I think I know. Where do I go and find research? So he's just pointing me down roads to start to read the research of suicidologists. And, and then one day, 2015, I found myself standing in front of a group of suicidologists at a conference in New York. And I'm going, how am I here?
How did that invitation come out?
So the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, I guess, had seen some online work and invited me to speak. It was just so bizarre that because of our experiences, they were reaching out to survivors.
Right.
I spoke, but there were other survivors there, and we were also on a panel, and they wanted to understand from our experience. And I think that was just, to me, it was just so incredible that they were actually, moving away from just the research and wanting to have the experiential understanding as well.
Who the research impacts.
Exactly.
And then when did the TED Talk come along?
That was 2014.
Yeah.
That was, so TEDx actually reached out to me. They just said, your name came up. We have 12 people on this panel that day, or not panel, but the way they work, they have a group of about 12 people. We'd like you to be one of our speakers. And they said, so this is the format. What do you think? And it was a point where I was able to sort of shrink my experience into 17, 18 minutes And I'd never done anything like that. And it was just, I was so nervous. Like I remember before I was called to go on, I was sitting with my daughter and her girlfriend and just like, how am I going to do this? And there was 250 kids from all across Toronto were invited to this day of talks. And I just remember thinking, this moment was a seminal moment in just my journey because they were just so honest and so open, and their expressions were what their expressions were going to be. They didn't hold back. And I felt empowered then because I thought, because you heard my story, I've given you something. And I felt like because they were there, I could feel that something had transpired. Yeah. So those kinds of moments, reaching out, especially to young people, just are my inspiration to continue. And frankly, Daniel hasn't given me a sign yet, so I'm still at it.
Keep chugging along, yeah. So then the book. So it sounds like you're using writing and speaking and discovering advocacy as partly a way to cope and to help others. So then, how did the book come about?
So again, through the writing, I ended up decided to take a course at Humber. It was or like a writer's workshop, and I met Miriam Taves, the author. Just by fluke, she happened to be my teacher for the week.
Oh, wow.
So basically, you're called to bring 10 pages of writing.
Right.
So these first pages turned out to be the first pages of the book.
Right.
And so we workshopped them among 8 or so people, and turns out she was a suicide survivor.
Really?
Her father and her sister. Wow. And I think recently she's written actually to that, especially about her sister. And she got my work in advance. So we had never had a conversation. And then we just happened to be in a ladies' room on the morning of, and we stopped and we talked and we hugged. And she said, I get your story. So let's go do some writing. And those first pages actually were, so I kind of kept those pages, and no matter what I had to do, even if the book changed completely, I knew those pages were pivotal to getting someone to enter my story, because it isn't a story about. It's just one family story, and it's a sort of a fully kind of a complete story of a family, as opposed to and hopefully someone will understand something through it about the process when someone's suffering from a mental health condition or living with severe anxiety and depression, whatever it is, and suicide loss. But it's really at the core, it's just a family story. And I think, I've tried to start writing. I've written a lot since then, but not in book format. And I think to myself, just go back to those 8 to 10 pages. Just write a few pages, because that's your start. Doesn't have to be the book, right? Yeah. And I know you're writing a book or just publishing a book.
Trying to. But 10 years in, I mean, what do you know now, 10 years later? You and your family, what have you learned in the last 10 years that you would have told yourself on that day when you found out about losing your son?
Live every day. I think that's, but I would say the one thing I've come out of this experience is I recognize that when we can engage others in our stories, we actually empower people. And I feel, I don't know that I would have ever had that thought before. I think I was just, kind of going around with my life. It was kind of good. Things, you had up and downs like all families do. You had struggles, you had triumphs. Really didn't look up to see what the heck was going on in my life. And, maybe being more present is part of it. But I can't spend the rest of my life beating myself up for things I wasn't aware of. But I certainly will always have a pain because like a sadness, a deep sadness in my heart, because I, for as connected as we were and are, I couldn't help Daniel in his toughest period of time because I was sort of getting little parts of this big painting, and I wasn't getting the full, but I wasn't getting it because I didn't understand. And I think if as a parent you have at the least an awareness of your kids' trajectory, their life experiences as a young person, sort of where they're at. Changes to behavior is huge. Leaving school, changes in diet and sleeplessness. Those are just taken on their own are warnings that your family member isn't functioning at whatever age.
Well, I hope this doesn't sound I hope this sounds the way that I mean it, but something that I've often wondered in myself too is, would you have learned that lesson had he not died? Had you not lost him? Would you have learned what you know now? Not to say that it needed to happen or that it was good, but would you have learned that?
I'd say yes, and here's why I would say that. Because from a very young age, I was Daniel's advocate.
Right.
I had always been his advocate with allergies. We set up seminars in our house with the allergists. Most of my life with Daniel was around advocacy.
Sure.
So, and when I walked into my doctor's office and Daniel was 2 years old, it was the allergist, and he said, "Your son could die from ingesting a peanut." What? And so from a very young age, I was very aware of that I had to try somehow to keep him safe. I didn't have those discussions in my mind about, how do I help his mental health?
Right.
Never had that. It was always around his physical health.
Right.
So I think, Mark, to be true, because I had to be an advocate from very young, I think, I think I would have got it. Life. This experience has changed us all. Certainly not for the better. The fact that that my husband and I are still together, the fact that my kids have gone on to do kind of great things, that's a testament to, I don't know what, Daniel's up there, the great, divine. But we've suffered, and I know those, anybody that's gone through things like yourself, your struggles, your journey, sometimes you have to stop and say, I've learned a lot through this process. I'm not necessarily a better person, but because of what I know, I can make a difference. And I think there's the gift. That is in all this horror and tragic circumstances. I think that's what I would say is, yes, I think I would have caught it or understood this, but we didn't get that chance. So now my opportunity is to change the life of someone else.
Well, this is it. And it's not to, I always hate when people silver line things on me and try to tell me to look at the good side and all this, because it doesn't work when you're in the, but I think that when presented with difficult circumstances, what else are you going to do? Like, what do you, is, I can do something with this, or I can stay in bed.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've done it all.
And this is it. And there's a time to do all of that stuff, but it's like when I wake up in the morning, what now? Yeah. Right. What else is there?
I find out, I think I really learned early on in this process when, so the first few months I started writing, actually, I wrote a piece that got published in Fact and Argument, and it was Mourning Our Two Daniels. And that was sort of my first recognition that there are other people that have gone through the same thing. Right. But I also saw some really negative, weird, I thought, that happens. I guess that's actually part of this too. But that was probably, and that was September of 2009, so it was very early on. But I think, when I said it probably took me longer, but that was the first recognition that I wasn't alone in this. So keep doing what you're doing, because people would say that. Thank you for saying or speaking our story. That is exactly what we experienced. I just didn't know what to say about it. Yeah. And if you've got that ability to have a voice, you don't have a sense of how many people you're speaking for, and changing something.
Well, and this has been my experience too, right? You're not going to be speaking to everybody, but the people that you do speak to, they're listening. Yeah. Then there's a lot of them out there. Yeah. I know that you've impacted so many parents, especially who have lost a loved one to suicide, a kid to suicide, something so unthinkable, and yet here you are running through it.
I'm still. Yeah, but that day, that day in July this year was, I started the swim at Lake Placid, and I remember my first thought was Daniel as I got into the water. Sort of context, the start of an Ironman is always frenetic, and at the water, everybody's like, even the good swimmers are panicking, and it's just this energy. And I thought, I kind of went into my own zone, and the rest of my family was with me, but I went into the water and just my least of all loved events, and I get in the water and I just had this zen, and I was just we were together, and got out of the water, got back in, did the second loop, and I remember my youngest saying to me, "What did you do? You got out of the water and you waved to the diver," and then took a sip of water and went back in. I said, I don't even remember. I was which speaks to the power of where we can come from or go to. Even in our worst, there is an ability for grace and life. And,
what a great, I can't think of a better analogy for grief than an Ironman competition where you're just flailing and panicking in the water at first, struggling to keep your head above the water.
It's pain. It's just a day of pain and being buoyed up by people all day. It is a kind of a metaphor for, and I think that's what my coach alluded to is I think for you, this was much more than just going to get a spot to Kona. It was really just to get in there and push your body to parts you've never been to. So
then maybe continuing that metaphor, I don't know, but what did you feel when you crossed the finish line?
A sense of relief and just this joy that I've never felt. You have joy when you have your children, and you have joy in different moments. But this kind of joy was because I knew I didn't get there alone, and I knew that the people closest to me were with me the whole day,
Daniel included,
and all the folks back home that were watching me on the app, and I just knew that there was so much love. Like I literally felt that love all day. So there was so much joy, and even when the day was just sucking, like I knew the sun was going to go down and I was going to finish in the dark. I kind of knew that anyway. But those last 2K were magic, and I thought you're just aware that there's so much good left. Like there's so many things to still be done, and it was euphoric. And I remember waking up the next day because I think we went to have something to eat, and then I just passed out. I was so tired, and the next day I woke up and I said to my girls, they kind of were looking like this, shaking their heads. I said, I think I want to try to qualify for Kona. And they're like, we knew you'd say that. We knew that's the next step. Because that was never in my, my future. But, you do what's in front of you. So,
what would you say to a parent who's just embarking, just at the starting line of losing a kid to suicide? As somebody who's been to the finish line.
I wish we could catch them before the start. I really hope that we've learned a lot. But if you are finding yourself in those early days of loss through suicide, particularly of a child, I would say right now the most important thing is you. And you really have to make space for the pain. It's just, it's the worst visceral sense of loneliness and loss of everything you believed in, but allow yourself to slowly walk towards it, because there's hope and there's life and there is joy on the other side of that. But it takes a lot of time. It's just I think we want things to be better, and we don't live in a world where we want to stay in pain for 5 years, 6 years. But I think when you lose a child, you have to allow there's no speeding through it. It's just, and honestly, I think it allows you to stay so connected to them. Even in the pain, there's a connection. And when you love, it'll hurt. There's no way around it. But there is hope on the other side.
Lynn, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me. You're such an inspiration to me personally, and I hope that you continue to run the race, that you continue to share your story and help so many people.
Thank you, Mark, and you inspire me. Thank you.
With that, I hope you go back and listen to some of the other episodes as well that we've done so far. We've got lots more coming for you that are a wide range of different topics, ranging from suicide to comedians and television personalities and so many others, to show that we really do have this common link between each other in terms of how we deal with struggle and how we build this thing that we call normal. So head on over to Apple Podcasts, subscribe to the show, leave us a rating if you like, and some comments in the bottom. That would be great. I mentioned to follow me on social media as well, but you can go to my website too, markhennick.com/so-called-normal. Read more about the show, more about me, what I do, how to contact me, all that stuff. If you want to try out some free, safe, effective psychotherapy, go to betterhelp.com/Mark. Enter the promo code Mark, my name, MARK, and you can try out a free trial with trained, credentialed psychotherapists, and from the comfort of your own home. At that, you can do it right from your phone in the comfort of your own home. So go check that out. BetterHelp.com/Mark. That's it for me, Mark Hennick. This has been So Called Normal.